Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host Greg Payne coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hey everybody, I'm super excited for you guys to listen to this conversation that I've had with Adrienne Davis. Adrienne's a super awesome person, and she is working through being trained as a nature and forest therapy guide. And together with her husband, they own T.A. Davis Outdoor Adventures. I'll put a link to their Facebook group in the show notes so you can check that out. But what Adrienne's working on is supporting children's health, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual through nature immersion. And where she came to this, you guys are going to find out shortly, but through interactions and being outdoors with her grandfather. Simple activities such as just being out gardening, cutting grass, doing things outside with her grandfather made such a huge impact where she found that that was where she got peace, being outside and being with nature, working with nature. You're going to hear a lot about the little things that her grandfather did while she was living with her grandfather and as she was being raised and going through a lot of really troubling and trying experiences. So grab a beverage, pull up a chair, and sit back and join our conversation. Hi, Adrienne. Thank you so much for spending time with me and joining in this conversation on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I really do appreciate you taking a moment of your time and sharing your stories and memories of your awesome grandfather with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as we get started, can you give us a little bit of background and introduce your grandfather to us?
Sure. I really don't know a lot. I know he was born in Kansas in 1930. At some point before he was 22, he ended up moving to Indiana. I happened to have a copy of his separation papers from the military, and it showed that he was living in Indiana when he went into the military at 22 years old. I know that he spent a year in the military, and then he was honorably discharged into the reserves. I know that at some point in his life, he was a truck driver as well as a Caterpillar repairman. Other than that, I don't really know too much as far as his childhood and, that goes.
Well, certainly during those kids born in the Depression, and it sounded like they moved around, at least, moved around some, that it's not uncommon to not have, a full-blown family history of every little detail, and so that's totally understandable. But it does sound like he had a pretty exciting career, between the farms and the truck driving. Probably a diesel mechanic is what it sounded like. Probably just had all sorts of different adventures and jobs along the way. So sounds like an interesting background. One of the things that we wanted to get into, and what I love talking to people about, is moving through an evolution of their relationship with their grandfathers. And what I mean by that is we'll talk a little bit about how he influenced you in your early years and then all the way up through your young adult years. You had the privilege of knowing him for some time in your life.
Yeah. I actually moved in with my grandparents when I was a year old. My mom became a truck driver, and so she was gone on the road a lot, and my grandparents agreed that they would basically raise me while she was gone.
Wow, there's a whole lot there, because when your mom went into the trucking industry, and I work in logistics myself, and I know that's pretty much a male-dominated field even still, that for somebody probably maybe 30, 40 years ago in the trucking industry for a woman, that was, I would say, unusual. Maybe not unheard of, but unusual, I would say. So,
yeah, she's been doing that for 36 years now.
Wow. Has she been with one organization that entire time?
No, she's worked for a few different companies.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is I had the good fortune of working at UPS for a long time, and I know that they've got some of their truck drivers and people that have worked there 25, 30 years and, different circumstances, but I know that at least that organization tends to really call out the people that have stayed in the industry, and for your mom to have stayed in that industry is quite a story and quite a feat.
Yeah, she's been all over all the different states.
Oh, wow. I bet, and I bet she's got a ton of stories herself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I used to go with her during the summers when I was out of school and made a lot of trips with her.
That's awesome to be able to have that experience to go and travel. You hear about places like Kansas or Arizona, but then to actually be able to take a trip with your mom and go to Massachusetts or go to Florida or do a run to Louisiana or something, had to have been pretty impactful for you.
Yeah, it was fun being able to see the different states and how so many, because, I live in Indiana and other states, it's so different to see the scenery there.
Now, when you moved in with your grandparents, obviously you're young, you're a year old, but what were some of the early memories that you had of your grandfather?
Well, he did a lot with me. One of the things that I loved was he taught me how to play checkers. And I still love playing checkers today. Of course, he would let me win because I was little, but he always would play a game with me, and we did a lot of stuff together.
Oh, that's fantastic. As you were playing checkers and learning that game with him, did his game get harder as your skills improved?
A little bit, but he still mostly let me win.
Okay. That's definitely one of those things where grandpas, I think, do that to help encourage the children, and get some self-confidence. And there's still a little bit of bragging rights, a little when you're a young kid and maybe you don't fully understand that grandfathers are letting you win, and you can, at least temporarily, you feel pretty good that, hey, I beat grandpa at checkers. This was awesome.
Yep.
Were there any experiences with elementary school in those times growing up that he helped you with and impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot. Like, we used to watch Bob Ross on TV together, and it really would calm me just to be able to watch that with him. During the winter time, we would go and every year just look at Christmas lights. We had one road that was down the street from our house that there was people that had a big, humongous backyard, or a front yard, and they went all out. I mean, they would decorate every tree in their yard, the house, and everything. And so we would always drive down that road and just look at all the Christmas lights, and we'd go down other roads, and it was just like we would just take a night and we would just go and drive around and look, and it was really neat just to be able to see how differently people would decorate. And one thing I was talking to my husband about, there was one year that I can remember in particular where we went to there was a big snow, and we went to the local park, and he actually went sledding with me. And it was so cool because, most of the time now as an adult and I go to the park, during sledding season, I will see like either kids there with their friends, or it might be like parents with their kids. But I don't ever see grandparents there sledding with their grandkids. So it was a pretty neat experience.
Oh, that's fantastic. And doing all those activities with your grandfather, how did that make you feel as a young kid?
It made me feel loved and valued. The fact that he included me, like we had, about an acre and a half, 2 acres that we lived on, and he would mow. He had a riding lawnmower, and he had this little black trailer that was attached to the back of it. Whenever he would go mow grass, he could have easily said, hey, I'm just going to go out here and mow the grass and get it done with. But he didn't. He would actually include me and let me ride in the little black trailer in the back while he was mowing. So he always wanted me out there with him.
Oh, that's awesome. That's such a I'd almost say a common theme. Grandfathers can really, especially I think with young girls, have that sense of love and protection and belonging. That's just added to whatever the other situations are with parents or whatnot. But there's something there with a grandparent, and especially a grandfather, I think, with a granddaughter, that just adds that layer of love and security that I think especially young girls need, also young boys, but there's some differences in those relationships. And so that's awesome that you had that experience with him. Now,
we spent a lot of time outdoors. I remember we had a little garden out back, and he planted some watermelon and cucumbers, and I would go out there with him and help him to pick them when they were ready. And we had a pool out back, and so we went swimming in that, and just a lot of time outdoors and spending time together.
How do you think that impacted your life and career and education and things with all that outdoor experience and that focus on being outdoors?
Well, it actually made me want to be outside more, and just being able to see the beauty of nature and knowing, because I remember whenever I was outside, I would always be really calm, whether it was working in the garden or, just walking around the backyard or swimming or whatever. Just being outside really made me feel better. 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with anxiety and panic disorder because over the years I started spending a lot more time indoors on my computer.
Sure.
And I had to end up going back to my childhood and really thinking about, I need to get outside. I really need to, because I remember the calming effect that it had when I was younger. And so being outdoors has really helped with the anxiety of the last few years. And most recently, I actually just almost finished with my training for forest therapy certification. I'm finishing up my last couple assignments right now, but basically I'm taking people into the forest and leading them on therapeutic walks out in nature so they can connect with the outdoors in a way that I was able to as a kid, just to be able to help them. And I mostly work with kids now, so just being able to give kids that experience of being outside and connecting with nature in a way that they may not have been able to, because, maybe a lot of kids didn't have the outdoor experience that I had.
That is awesome. And it's such an amazing thing that you can kind of take a step back and draw a line back to your grandfather getting you outside and getting you out where you could be calm, where you can find peace, recenter yourself, and then being able to now take that out and share that experience and teach that experience with other children and other people through that same type of lesson, and that was such an amazing story, and thank you for sharing that, because I think one of the things that we don't often connect with is that grandfathers, by some of the simple acts that they do, can have that big of an impact on a person's life and even career choices and well-being long after the initial activity was done. Now, how did the relationship evolve going into, let's say, the 6th grade, middle school years?
Well, when I was, so we lived in a different area until I was about 10 years old. When I was 10 was when we moved out to where we had a couple acres of land. But I remember we moved like 2 months before school was out. And so I didn't want to switch schools, with 2 months left. So he would actually drive me every day. It was maybe like a 30 to 35 minute trip one way. And he would drive me to school every morning and pick me up every afternoon. And it was just, it was really nice to be able to have that time with him in the car and getting to talk with him. As I, got into middle school, I had some issues. I was bullied in middle school, especially, really bad. And then my grandma also was verbally abusive to me. And so it became really hard to deal with. And I remember my grandpa just standing up for me, and just our relationship kind of grew closer at that point, because it was like the more that she was, calling me stupid, or she would tell me that I would never amount to anything. And I just really developed this low self-esteem. And then with my classmates, making me feel like I wasn't a part of, of that. I basically spent my middle school years alone, by myself at the school. And I mean, he just really, that's when he was doing all this stuff with me and playing checkers and taking me outside and just really spending time with me. Like one of the big issues I had was my grandma wanted me to go to my room all the time because she wanted to watch TV. She wanted to just be alone. And so she would just tell me to get out of her hair, don't bother her. And my grandpa was like, okay, come into my room, let's play checkers, or let's go outside and mow the grass, let's go work in the garden. It was always like he would make time for me, and he had stuff to do on his own, and right. It probably would have been a lot faster for him to do it by himself, but he just really stood up for me. He would tell my grandma, he would just stand up for me in those moments when she was starting to be hateful towards me, and he would kind of get me out of that situation and help me to get my mind onto something else.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's also another role too, is that sometimes we like to talk about all the easy things of being a grandfather, taking somebody for an ice cream or something like that. But grandfathers do have that role, and maybe not all of us step up, but it sounds like your grandfather was awesome in that he was able to at least be there and shield you from some things, and then also help you cope and deal with some of the negativity that was going on during those years. So he's definitely to be commended. And I would just also say, for the other grandfathers out there, is that when the grandchildren are in those negative situations, be another person that steps into their lives and connects and helps them through that. And don't be shy about it either, because if it doesn't happen, then who knows how that life trajectory changes at that point. So thank you so much for sharing that. So it sounds like you guys grew even closer. It went from younger years, let's say elementary school years, that you guys were palling around and things, and then once middle school hit, you started having a really hard time with your grandmother, and then also at middle school. So there wasn't even the relief of coming home from middle school and then having that shelter at the house. It was coming back into almost the same type of a situation. So how did that start to change, or did it change over some time going into your high school years?
Well, this is the part that I don't want to admit, but as I got older, around 14, 15, I, even though my grandpa was there for me and made time for me, I kind of shielded away from that. I got involved with the wrong crowd and started hanging out with my friends, and it was like, even though my grandpa did all these things for me, it was like, oh, I'm putting grandpa on the back burner now, because now I have, I have friends. They weren't the right kind of friends, but it was more like, okay, I'm a teenager. I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to live my own life. And, we still did some things together. When I turned 16, he took me to the license branch and let me use his car. It was a gray station wagon that I used to take my driving test. We still had some times like that, but it was more or less like I would just, see him when I came home from my friend's house.
But I also think too that that's a normal part of growing up and getting older is trying to discover your own path, and and there's some rebellion I think that normally happens even with parents and children at that point. I think a lot of people start to discover that the kids aren't hanging out as much anymore. They're off with their friends, they're doing other things. But then the core of that relationship was probably still intact, don't you think?
Yeah, and it was nice because even though I really didn't make the time for him that I should have, like, he was always there. And so even when I came home from being with my friends, I mean, if I wanted to spend time with him or talk to him or whatever, he was always there. He didn't ever say, oh, well, you didn't have time for me, so I'm not going to have time for you. I mean, it was always like, I'm here if you need me.
Wow. I think just reinforces, some of what we've heard people talking about. The important part with grandparents is that unconditional love and that being open so much to when you do have activity time with the children, no matter what their ages are, that there is that time and ability to step into that and take advantage of when it's offered to you, because it's not always offered. You had a unique experience living with your grandfather for a long time, where other people may not see them for a couple of years at a time. But I think it's important that when you do have that availability, that grandparents definitely can and should put some time aside to make sure that they focus back in on those grandkids to keep that relationship going.
Yeah. I remember one instance in particular, my junior year of high school, and it stands out to me because I ended up, I made a bad choice at school, and I ended up getting expelled, and I had to call my grandpa to come and pick me up because they wanted me to clean out my locker and leave the school immediately. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, like, I'm going to be in so much trouble, like, I can't come back to school for the rest of the year. And my grandpa, I mean, he was so nice on the phone. He said, I'll be there in a few minutes. He actually came in and helped me clean out my locker, did not say anything negative whatsoever. He helped me carry everything out to the car. The whole ride home, I mean, it was just, we talked about other stuff. It wasn't even anything about school. And I honestly do not remember our conversation, but I know that he never said anything bad about that experience. I mean, he never condemned me. He never, said anything negative at all. He was totally just on board, on my side. And that meant a lot to me because, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in big hot water here. But he never, I mean, my mom was mad when I told her about it, very mad. But my grandpa was just like, it's okay. Things happen, you're a teenager. And it was just, that really spoke to me because of the fact that I know that, and I've witnessed, a lot of parents and grandparents that do condemn their kids and like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. And for him to just totally, be understanding and kind and compassionate really spoke volumes to me.
Do you think that kept you from going further down a negative path? Him taking that stance?
Yeah, I think it helped a lot just because it showed me that, people are human and they make mistakes, and being hateful or angry is not going to solve anything. It's not going to change the fact that we're human and we mess up.
So how did the relationship, as you're starting to get, let's say, more towards your 17, 18 young adult years, how did that relationship evolve even further?
Well, when I was 17, I actually moved. My mom quit driving temporarily and she moved to Tennessee. And so I actually moved with her. And so it was basically at 17 was when I moved out of my grandparents' house and then kind of started living. And then I moved out of my mom's house and ended up getting married and kind of started my own life. So I would come back and visit. At one point, my son was born in 2004. I was 20 years old, and I came back and lived with my grandparents temporarily until I could get on my feet. And my grandpa, I mean, he loved my son. He would play with him and, spent time with him. And so I'm really glad that my son got to experience the connection with my grandpa that I did. And, but then we were there for a short period and then we moved out. So it was kind of like after that I would come and visit visit when I could, but I really wish I would have visited a lot more than what I did.
No, that makes sense. Now, how is the relationship evolving from that point? Because you're seeing him. You went from seeing him every single day, with the exceptions of the summers and when you're taking trips with your mom, to now, you moved into Tennessee. He's still not that far away in Indiana, but it's still a drive. You're not going up there every afternoon to go see him. How did the relationship start to evolve, and how did you guys stay in communication with each other?
Well, we wrote letters. I actually, backing up, when I was 12, I moved with my mom to Colorado because she again was taking a break from trucking. And so we were in Colorado for 9 months, and we would write letters during that time and just stay connected and talk on the phone. And then I moved back, back home with my grandparents. And so then when I was 17 and moved to Tennessee, it was the same thing, just kind of writing letters and keeping in contact through the phone. And then after my son was born and kind of moved around, I mostly after that stayed in Indiana at that point, but was living about maybe 20 to 30 minutes away from them.
Okay.
So I would come and visit sometimes, but it was mostly just, phone calls and talking and keeping up with him through the phone.
Now, did he at that point take on a little bit more of a, let's say, mentor role? Were there things just going on in life, large purchases, cars or house or moving into apartments and things where you'd start to run things by him as a sounding board?
Not really. Once I moved out and kind of became an adult and had my own kid, it was more or less like he was living his life at home, and then I was living mine, and just kind of kept in contact with each other. And it's like, hey, this is what's going on in my life, and
Okay, so it sounds like you guys did drift apart, and I don't mean that so much in a negative sense, but it's hey, I'm a young person, I've got my life, I've got a son now, life's busy, and then he's probably at that point also starting to get towards retirement, maybe kind of slowing things down, doing more of his hobbies and interests and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, he had actually been retired for a while, since I was, I think since I was 10.
Oh, okay.
But when my son was 6 years old, my grandpa actually developed Alzheimer's and dementia. And so he kind of went downhill fast. They think he had dementia for like at least a couple years, and then kind of, in 2010, he developed Alzheimer's, and just, it went very rapidly.
Wow.
And he ended up having a stroke in June of 2010, and then by July 23rd, he was gone.
So towards the end, were you able to maintain any kind of a relationship with him?
Yeah. When he actually had his stroke, I immediately went over to his house and went to the hospital, and I basically spent like that whole last month of his life with him, like by his side. And he got to the point where they thought he was going to be able to come home, but because of the stroke and he was experiencing like failure to thrive and just had a lot of issues, they felt like he needed 24-hour supervision. And so I ended up going through the process of, filing for temporary guardianship over him through the courts, and I got awarded that. I was trying to talk with my landlord about getting a downstairs apartment, because at that point I was living upstairs, and I'm like, there's no way my grandpa's going to get up these stairs. So we were working on having me move downstairs and being able to bring him home to live with me and getting everything gathered up. But he ended up getting a little bit worse. And he was in his last week of life. He ended up going into a nursing home. And I was there every single day, did not want to leave his side for anything. And July 23rd, the nurses got to know me really well, and I ended up going home for something, and I said that I would be back in a little bit. And I remember, because he was doing really good. He was remembering who I was. He didn't know anybody else. My mom walked in there at one point to the room. My grandma walked in, and he didn't know who they were. And when I would walk into the room, he would say, Adrienne, and he would immediately just know who I was, and he would reach for me. So and he seemed like he was doing okay. So I left for a little bit to go home, told him I'd be back. Well, as soon as I got home, I got a phone call from one of the nurses that knew me really well at the nursing home. And she said, Adrienne, I think you need to get back here right away because he's not looking good. And so I immediately jumped back in my car, went back up to the nursing home, and I just made it into his doorway, didn't even get to his bed, and he took his last breath.
Oh my. Well, it's amazing that how he still recognized you through all the challenges and everything that he had right up to the end. And that's got to say something about how much he loved you and that relationship you guys had forged from the very early years.
Yeah. When I actually left, because he remembered me up until I think it was right before I left that day to go home, and he asked me who I was, and I thought he was joking. But then I realized, oh my gosh, he really doesn't remember me now. And so I kind of had this feeling like that was the final countdown, I guess. I was the last one he remembered, and now he's asking who I am. So, but he seemed okay other than that, and just seemed like he was doing okay. So that's why I left and went home. But I don't know, there was something in me that said, I just felt like something was going to happen. And so when I got that phone call, it's I kind of already felt like that was going to happen.
Well, as we start to wrap things up, what I would love to do is have you share a favorite memory of you and your grandfather. You've shared a bunch with us, but if there's a particular story or a particular event that you would love to share with me and with the audience, I'd love to hear it.
Honestly, everything I shared, my favorite memory was just the Christmas lights. I love Christmas. It's my favorite time of year. And even though I don't like cold weather and I live in a super cold state, but every year I remember us going to the Circle Center in Indianapolis and just looking at the big Christmas tree there and, going around and looking at all the lights. And it was, I don't know if that's what made me like Christmas so much, but I love it. And even now my son is going to be 17 next month. And, we go look at lights sometimes during the Christmas season. And I love this time of year, and it really makes me think of my grandpa. And so every time we go and look at lights now, and I always think of when I did that with my grandpa.
Oh, sure. Well, and you probably had the Christmas music may have been playing, and maybe there was hot chocolate, maybe not. But, it's the sights and sounds and smells and things that draw us back. One of the oddest things is, with regards to my grandfather here, is that when I go by a farm and I can smell the mixture of manure and dust, it takes me back to my grandfather's farm every single time. But those memories and the sights and sounds and smells even just make that connection and bring those memories back, both good and bad. And thank goodness, especially around Christmas time, you've got those awesome positive memories of your grandfather.
Yeah, and you mentioning the sights and sounds made me think of something else. Because I had said that I used to ride in his trailer when he was mowing the grass, And during the summers here, and, whenever it's nice and people are out mowing their grass, a lot of people can't stand the sound of a lawnmower, and they get annoyed, and they're like, oh my gosh, the neighbors are out mowing the grass, and I wish they would stop. But for me, like, the sound of that, I don't know, and I know that it reminds me of my grandpa, but every time I hear anybody mowing their grass, I just instantly get calm. Like, there's some noises that irritate me, but the sound of a lawnmower actually calms me. It soothes me, and I will open my windows just so I can hear the lawnmower better no matter where I'm at, because it makes me remember those memories of me and my grandpa.
Yeah, it takes you back to being in the trailer behind that little riding lawnmower.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about that maybe we haven't covered, or?
Not really. I think we covered most everything.
And last thing, any advice that you might have to an old guy like me that grandfathers and people out there, as far as relationships and what you've seen and maybe what you've experienced, any advice that or input that you would have for our lives?
Yeah. One, I made a list actually. The top of the list, love them well. Absolutely love your granddaughters. Tell them that you love them. Make time for them. No matter what, never make them feel like they're a burden to you, even if you're, trying to get something done. Never be afraid to show them affection. I know in our world today, it's hard for men to show affection to young girls, and our culture is so kind of out of whack, but never ever be afraid to show physical affection to your granddaughters. And the one other thing that I put was to tell them about your childhood and write your story down so they can know it. And even if they forget it, they'll have that written down for them. So, because the one thing that I struggle with now as an adult is there's so many things that I never asked my grandpa. I never took the time to ask him about his childhood or about his military career or, what his first job was and if he liked it or not. And I don't have any living relatives that would even know that information. And he didn't write anything down for me. And so it's like, I'm left to wonder, like, I have all these questions that are going to be left unanswered because I'm never going to have anybody that can answer accurately. So I would definitely say to make sure that your granddaughters know about your life. And then I also made a list of advice for granddaughters because I know some granddaughters might be listening to this as well.
Okay.
Make time for your grandpa. Even as you get older, don't let other things get in the way. Even when life gets busy, make time for your grandpa. Don't ever take him for granted because he won't always be here. At some point, he's going to leave this earth and you're not going to have another chance. Ask him questions about his life. Get to truly know him, know his childhood, know his story. Tell him you love him. And then the last one I put, hug him, kiss him a lot.
Oh, that is awesome. Can you do me a favor and email me those lists? I'd love to put those in the show notes.
Sure.
I really have enjoyed this conversation and have appreciated you taking the time to share your stories about your wonderful grandfather. He sounds like he was just a heck of a guy and, definitely an example for so many of us. Just really appreciate you having this conversation with us.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Hey guys, I don't know about you, but I was really blown away by this interview. One of the biggest takeaways that I've got from this conversation with Adrienne has been just how the little things that her grandfather did made such a huge impression. We've learned so much about his activities, about getting Adrienne outside of the house, outside of away from difficult situations. working with her in the yard, doing gardening, cutting grass, even just driving around looking at Christmas lights. Man, what a huge impact those little things that we do have with our grandchildren. It's certainly one of the things that I'm going to remember as my grandkids get older, is to make sure that I don't take for granted that the little time that we spend together doing almost just simple, forgetful activities, from my point of view, have such a huge impact on those grandkids. So if you've learned anything and want to share with me, shoot me an email at greg@cool-grandpa.com. Let me know what it is that you learned. There's so many great takeaways here, and I really appreciate you stopping by and joining in our conversation. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.